Hello and welcome. I am Dr. Camille Lafleur, and I am the chair of the Topical Interest Network, Margins to Center, Cultural Connections Among CMFTs. This network is focused on increasing cultural competence and humility among CMFTs in order to better serve diverse families in therapy. We also seek to create a space where CMFTs of color and allies can network together and support one another in the field. We're excited to be partnering with AMFT for this discussion today of the Black family, representation, identity, and diversity. Today on our panel, we have Dr. Portia Cunningham, Dr. George James, Dr. Jocelyn Armstrong, and Dr. Michael Lee Cook. Thank you all for being here. Let's get started. So if we start out talking about identity, how would you define the Black family?
So I'll go ahead and speak a little bit on that as it pertains to what is Black, right? And I think that's really the question that's soaring right now is what is Black, who gets to call themselves Black, and what that means and what meaning that holds in our families and our relationships. And so the first thing I would like to just point out is that we don't really have a distinct definition for Black. And so when we're thinking about a clinician's perspective, even when you see a Black family sitting across from you, a family of color, an African-American family, a Caribbean family, an African family, Afro-Latino family, or any of the other varieties of categories that might identify as Black, we have to remember that their culture is not defined as one overlapping identity. And even within, per se, for example, let's say an African-American family, there could be various cultures. Even right before we started this, we were, some of the representatives here were speaking. And when we're asking where we're from, right? So if there's someone that's from Miami and they identify as Black, they might have a very different experience than, let's say, where I was from, Fayetteville, North Carolina. You can just hear by the sound of that there might be a little more greenery in that area than maybe a metropolitan city. And in those areas, the narrative for those Black families also shift. And so just staying curious and open, not really confining in that Black family, the identity and the meaning behind Black, and just getting curious about what it means for our clients, also what it means for ourselves, might help us as we try to approach the Black family and build the Black family.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent sort of summation in terms of what we're talking about when we're talking about identity of the Black family. One of the things I'd like to piggyback off of in terms of that, those comments, is the idea that a Black family, to understand a Black family, you have to understand a Black family over multiple generations. And what that really means is that, where the original family of the Black family originated from has a lot to say about the identity of that family. If the identity of that family, originated, say, in Africa, that's going to be different than that Black family originating in South Carolina. And so when you are going to try to understand the identity of the Black family, we do well to try to map out, where did this family come from? Let's get very curious about, did they originate again in the Caribbean? Did they originate on the homeland of Africa? Did they originate in South Carolina? And even in that process, we might ask, what was the position of the families in those particular contexts, right? I mean, if you originated in say the Caribbean and your family worked in the fields, that would be different than if your family originated in the Caribbean and they worked in the house. It would be different than if your family essentially had children that was from the same culture, or if you were a product of slave master and one of the enslaved Africans and so forth. So when you're thinking about the identity of the Black family, it's much more involved than just simply the color of a person's skin or exactly where they're from. There are all these dynamics that are going on that oftentimes are simply not considered when actually thinking about the identity of the Black family. So as clinicians, as well as clients, as well as anyone that's even considering the Black family, I think it's important to think about the Black family in the context of generation from generation to generation. And I think it's helpful to say that most families, Black or otherwise, are really only able to kind of reach back to about 4 generations of their families. So there's a whole lot going on even before we get to the 4th generation. So those are the kind of things that I think should be under consideration when we think about the identity of the Black family.
Yes, for me, I love the conversation around generations and looking to our ancestors for examples of our identity. To me, the survival of Black love is a testament to the vibrance of Black families when we think of families. And to me, the identity of Black marriage has roots in resistance and resiliency. Looking to our ancestors as examples, in slavery, Black relationships and Black marriages were not validated or legally recognized. And as a form of resistance, Black people created our own way to celebrate and uplift our love. So to me, the fact that despite our ancestors facing enslavement, Jim Crow laws, lynching, and systemic racism, they were still able to find love, to marry, and to have children, points to the resiliency of Black love, and which is part of our identity, that no matter the obstacles, Black love remains. And so I really love that. That is truly a testament, a part of our identity as a culture, is that resiliency and that resistance piece.
Absolutely.
Appreciate what everyone has shared. And when I think about what I could possibly add to this, I think about, when I think about like the Black family, as we're all saying, there's not just one way to think about the Black family. There's not one way to think about Blackness. But there's some things that kind of come to mind, right? And I think about the ways that we think about our culture, the way that we interact with people. I think about food, right? How we think about food and our relationship to food, and how that can change from different parts of the country, different parts of the world, and it's still Black. And I think about myself growing up in a Jamaican family where, like, we're gonna have that oxtail. We're gonna make sure that we have that, and how that is a part of the identity of who we are. I think about music, I think about fashion, I think about all these things that sometimes have been connected to the way that we express our Blackness. I even think about that, oftentimes we need to talk about racism and slavery and the injustices that Black people have experienced. But we also need to talk about, and I hear how people reference this, that our history of being kings and queens, and how people will say to each other, hey, what's up, right? That's my queen, that's my king. And all of that is a part of how we embrace Blackness as a culture, as a society, and how people might think about it, how we can carry parts of our identity and our Black identity in the different ways we interact, from whether we dap or whether we give each other a handshake, whether we, give just a nod. I remember just being on campus, right? You gotta like, what's up, right? Like, there's a way that we embody that and we carry that. And I think I see that with my clients. And even just earlier today, how I saw it with a client where we talk about the multiple identities, where you can maybe be, this particular client was born in the States, went to an African country to spend most of his schooling, and then came back for college. And when people ask, where are you from, right? Now we have to wrestle with what part of our identity, our Blackness, do we express. And so there's a lot of different things I think that comes up, and I really love what you all shared. And I just want to highlight just that the energy that we feel when as Black folks in our connection in society. And I think about those things. Nobody asked me for no oxtail. I'm keeping mine. All right.
I appreciate I think we talked about the balance between how, books and information is available, all of these aspects that help people understand how Blackness is defined. But really the importance is that self-definition, and that not just when we're talking with our clients, but when we talk with anyone, that we're allowing people to identify and to represent themselves in the ways that they want to, and that we're engaging them in that conversation becomes so important. So I really appreciate the balance between, there's some information that you have that absolutely informs what you understand about identity, but the real power is in that individual's representation of their identity and how they talk about that as well. So you all kind of mentioned the diversity and went into different groups that make up what we call Black in America. So what's the value in that? What is the value of diversity?
One of the things that I think about right off the top is, like in all families, there's no such thing as an ideal family. Oftentimes people believe that there's an ideal family, that, two parents, two professionals, two educated folks, living in the suburbs, have all the food, clothes, and shelter they need. Then that's just going to turn out just a fabulous child and so forth. But the reality of it is that there are single folks that are, haven't had any formal training, that raise just very, very resilient and gritty people and so forth. So when we kind of think about diversity, again, keep in mind that there is no ideal family. And the value of diversity, it teaches us that there are a lot of ways that a family can be structured and yet still be very meaningful and function very effectively. Part of the challenge is of opening up the conversation about the diversity of Black families is that oftentimes families will come into therapy believing that if they don't match what is considered the ideal family, that there's something fundamentally wrong with it. Like I often talk to, a lot of Black single women that might come and they say to themselves that they are single women, like they're single moms. And just that kind of categorization of a person saying that you're a single mom comes with all kind of political and social and religious sort of connotations. And it doesn't really speak to the level of assets, character, value that's within that person. This person is far more than just a single mother. This person, it used to be someone's daughter. This is someone's aunt. This could potentially be someone's classmate. So there's so much there. And so I think the value of diversity is to allow people to begin to see themselves differently. As many of you know, if you've been a client of psychotherapy, or if you are a clinician, oftentimes we go into therapy locked into a particular narrative about who we are, because that's the narrative that we've been told. But if the work works, it gives us an opportunity to see that we're far more diverse and we hold far more strengths than what that category has given us. So when it comes to diversity, I think the value of it is that it opens the way for us to be able to write new narratives about ourselves and the family structure.
That's a really good point, Michael. I love that aspect that you said of upping the conversation. I would connect that to Black love and Black relationships, and we are seeing that actually through Black relationships and Black love, that continues to shift the narrative of what we think about and our conceptualization of Black love. So there's so much diversity even within Black love that's expansive. So for many years, it was seen as a revolutionary act and a form of resistance for two Black people to come together and to remain together despite various obstacles, right? But then we have the recognition and even the increase of interracial and interethnic marriages that involves Black people, that's continuing to shift and expand our ideas of Black love and the diversity. Then we have the legalization of same-sex marriage in 2015. And that has expanded our discussion about including queer relationships in modeling Black love. And so I'm curious, as we continue to evolve and as time passes through us, continues to move, to see how the Black community will include polyamory and other forms of non-monogamy in our conversations and considerations of Black love and Black relationships.
Once again, when I think about like this conversation about diversity within the Black community, and I think about a few different things, right? I think about the things that we get exposed to, like what do we learn growing up? What do we teach our children? What are the multiple stories? Because on some level, what they might get in the educational setting in my opinion, is not enough. And so we have to give more and have to share more. What books, what information, what are the things that they might do? How do we encourage them to express and share all different parts of who they might be? I think about the things that we watch, the things that we read, the movies, the characters that we see, that sometimes that unfortunately, there wasn't always diversity in what we could read or what we could see or the types of people that would be portrayed. But then we've seen the expansion of that over years. People, black folks, people of color playing multiple roles, playing multiple identities that we can now say connect to. I also just think about that diversity is also about exposure and exposure to other black people that, like, you know, growing up in, you know, North Jersey and then meeting somebody from Greensboro, North Carolina in college, you know, we had some similarities, but we had some differences, right? And being able to learn from each other and understand, once again, how rich and diverse being black can be. You know, and I also just think about exposure to other countries, exposure to other cultures within the black community and other cultures outside. I've learned a lot from colleagues and friends of other ethnicities and backgrounds, and I hope and I believe that they've learned from me, and that that exposure has allowed me then to think about what are the things that I want to teach my children. For example, growing up, skiing was something that white people did, right? And that's not something that I thought or knew or understood until I had to explore and expand. And that was only based off of my limited experiences. But now I have my 10-year-old and 8-year-old are taking ski lessons because it is not just for white people. It is for anybody. And it is for the expansion of what is diverse in terms of thinking about blackness. So I think about it's all these different ways that we allow ourselves. And I think that's what we hope to do clinically, to really allow people to explore their identity, to explore their diversity, and to maybe unlock the places that they've maybe shut down and said, that's not me or that's not black, when it is, because that is the full diversity that it could be, and you can be whatever you need to be and whomever you need to be.
Nice. I think about our talking about diversity in the different groups and family representation across the board. And I want to ask you all to maybe speak to what connects us then. So when we look at the last year, there's been a lot of highlight on injustice in this country and the ways in which we're treated at work, in society, and everywhere. And I think it's important that our connection isn't just through the injustice that we've experienced. So can you speak to just a little bit of what you think, what are the other things that connect us, that connect Black people together to one another?
So, one of the things,
sorry.
Oh, one of the things I was thinking of, the thing that that strikes me is just over my time in working with folks and just coming out of my own family experience, is I think one of the things that connects Black folks, it's not tangible, but it's always there that I've seen, and that is this kind of this ongoing optimism. There's a certain kind of hope that connects Black folks against all odds. I mean, you know, you can look at it on a football field, you can look at it in academia, you can look at it everywhere, and we always have this belief on some level that it's going to be all right, that we're going to somehow overcome. Like, it's always there on the forefront. We always get reminded of it. You know, I'm not, regularly heard white folks tell other white folks it'll be all right. But I hear Black folks saying all the time, you know, hold your head up, keep your head up, it's going to be all right. So in some ways, we have this kind of ongoing, underlying hope and optimism that there is a better day. And I think on some level that really connects us in a very meaningful way.
Portia?
Yes, I wanted to speak on that as well. I believe that in Black culture in general, we have a sense of community almost. I remember growing up, and you didn't have to be my biological mother, father, aunt, uncle. None of that mattered, right? You could have been somebody in a grocery store and you saw me acting out and you were going to invest in me. And I call it investment because that's exactly what I felt like it was at the time. That's what my family, my grandmother, my parents received it as, almost like there was always someone around. It was literally an intangible, and it didn't need to be spoken about, sense of community, and that everyone took ownership of our melanin, if you will, you know, just took ownership of that and invested in that and saw that even, you know, church members, you know, if you go to church or whichever, they had pride in my accomplishments. There was a connection there that is just indescribable. And I honored that. And I made sure that when I spoke to my elders of color, I just knew. And I don't really know how. I guess that's for the cultivation of my family and the nurturing in my homes. But I knew what I was supposed to do during those times. And every time that I did what I was supposed to do, I came out better and with an added value on the other end. And so it was like additional reinforcement just throughout my development that really made a significant difference.
Yeah, I really like the thought of investment. I'm thinking about all the people who have invested in me and growing up to this point, and I think like there is that thought of our oral history, like within families, of how people dealt with challenges, overcame, and you know, Portia, even as you mentioned, like church, if people go to church, for me, right, like faith has been and was really crucial, right, to the thought of like, how do I understand myself? How do I understand God? How does that connect? But learning that through others. And so I think like what connects is that like, because of that, like I could connect with other people, or whether it be education, or whether it be about wanting to continue to grow and to be a positive impact, as you know, as Michael shared about that positivity, or that willing to have hope in the midst of challenges. So I think like these experiences have connected us. And you know, I even I saw in the chat somebody said, you know, through hope and pain, right? And I think like that was a great thing to highlight, right? That these stories that we share about the hope, about the pain, about our obstacles, about our aspirations, and that, you know, you can connect quickly. And just really short, just today, someone had to deliver something at my house, and it was a husband and wife. And they're like, we don't usually get to do this to Black families. And like instantly there was a connection. We didn't say much, we didn't do much, but there was already like, I wanted the best for them, and I felt like they wanted the best for me instantly. And I think like that's part of that connection that's there, is like, I see you. All right, I see you.
For me, I agree with Michael. It's very unspoken, and it's almost kind of difficult to explain. Maybe that's where, once again, just Black people understand Black people. For me, I think it comes down to the language that we use sometimes. Is it can be unspoken, like I could just give a look to someone and they know. I know growing up, my mom would give me that look, and I knew, all right, let me get myself together and behave, because she's gonna pop off on me. And just other unspoken looks, right? I could say to Camille and Portia, girl, and we know just from that exuding that one word, that one phrase that has so multiple meanings, that we as a culture have been able to dissect and figure out that other cultures may not have that experience in doing, right? I also think for me, it's our creativity that connects us. That I love that we talked about the hope and the pain, and in both of those experiences, we've been able to allow our creativity to illustrate those different experiences. And then connect us further. I'm really active on Twitter. And so the thing on Twitter is Black Twitter. And Black Twitter can turn you into, you know, help you rise to fame or burn you to the ashes, right? And that's through Black people being creative and using our voices to create a narrative, right? Create an experience. And then I also think it's also our ability to laugh despite it all. We can make a joke almost out of anything, and I love that. I think that really speaks to our culture and the hope that we have, the faith that we have, but even the moments that we can further connect with each other. I get compliments all the time about my laughter is is unforgettable in a sense of it's loud, it takes up space. And I'm proud of that, right? Because to me, that speaks to the culture, right? I've learned how to laugh through my ancestors, through sitting at the table and just listening, right? Because we could only listen at that point, to my parents and my grandparents talking about, sharing stories like what George said. So those things kind of stick out to me as what connects us together.
Wonderful, yes. I would just add, I hear her diversity, investment. I always say I love Black people. I see us dancing, we tell jokes, we're teaching. As much as I'm ready for COVID to be gone, I absolutely appreciate having the opportunity the last year to be online and to see just greatness across the board, across the nation. So much teaching has gone on, so much connecting has gone on, that it just really speaks to the power and the hope that we use, that maybe empowers us to continue working through the injustice. And it's just really hard. And I think we have made it look easy, but it's not easy at all. And so being able to kind of sit and think about that piece and how we connect beyond that injustice and really connecting through that hope is important. So we can end kind of thinking about representation then. What is the significance of representation?
I think when I think of representation, I would define that more as assigning meaning on a societal level. And I start from the top and bring it down, because really, even as I have two young children, and I'm very intentional about the books that I read to them. My daughter has very curly hair, and she's biracial. And so I'm very particular about the pictures that she's seeing. And just as a small example, I can tell the books that she gravitates to. And I think that's because really we're all longing inside to relate and to collaborate and to connect, right? I want to see me in someone else. And when, like, for example, what Michael was sharing earlier, when we start to see these standards that are set across media platforms, in our political offices, in positions of leadership, in our teachers, in our textbooks, and when our face is missing, when our color is missing, when our story is missing, now standards are set for us that don't fit, right? And that's when diversity is missing. And so now we feel like we're missing. I think I saw in the comments this idea of seeing and being seen, right? That's the connection piece that I believe representation provides across sexuality, across race, across color. And I say color specifically because, you know, even in our community, there might be colorism, right? And those also need to be represented, and those conversations need to be had, because there's meaning that's assigned from those before. I mean, my daughter just started talking and she can't even formulate a sentence, right? But she goes specifically to the book that with the curly hair, right? And all of that, because she's looking to relate. She's looking to see herself, to understand herself, to define herself. And so it's for us to represent, right? And I say that, y'all know what I'm saying. It's for us to represent, okay? But that's the representation piece, right? That's the representation piece that we need for our children from young until now, our couples, our families. Also, we talked a little bit about multicultural families. How are we seeing that, right? Are we seeing blended homes? Are we seeing co-parenting units and media to really give a realistic expectation of what those dynamics should look like in order for the Black family to be successful, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that's just a fantastic point, because one of the things I think about when it comes to representation, and this is something that really I've been thinking about quite a while, because, you know, sometimes we get caught up in emotions. You have these phrases that come out, but they really don't cover everything that could really be covered. Like when people even say Black Lives Matter, let's get an agenda for Black folks, right? But the truth of the matter is that, you know, a certain political agenda may not represent or be helpful for portions of Black folks in, you know, as a group. I know this is probably a touchy subject, but the truth of the matter is that even with the ideal of, you know, pushing for elimination of student loans, right? there's a certain portion of Black folks that have never been to college, and they have no, that's not their story. That's not their issue, right? But the question becomes, is there enough representation that everyone gets an opportunity to have what might be useful for them as a member of the Black family, to be able to get some access to that? If we're talking about, the elimination of student loans, can we talk about, maybe funding some programs to help, single mothers or single fathers fund daycare, as an example? Do we hold those two needs, parallel, or do we have some needs that just simply override others? But I think if we think about the Black family and we think about real representation, we're really going to look more deeply at, what are the needs across the spectrum, not what might be most obvious, but what about those folks that are in the corners, silent, that never get an opportunity to really get represented? So it would be my sort of thought and invitation for us to see representation as something far more than what might be just a kind of a generalization of what Blacks families or Black lives or whatever that represents, because there's much more to it. And I think there are a great number of people who suffer because their voices within the conversation of, say again, Black Lives Matter, never get the light of day.
When I think of representation, I love that we touched on in books and in media and then in the political sphere. I think as it relates to mass media and social media. So wanting to connect it to Black marriages specifically, really quickly, I think it has shifted the representation in mass media and social media of Black marriages over time. So oftentimes Black marriages are portrayed in stereotypical ways in social media and mass media. And so we can question what is missing from the current representations of Black marriages and Black love in those different spheres, right? And is there enough representation, kind of like what Portia and Michael were saying? We see, just broadly speaking, what we've been talking about, the diversity and the inclusion, that Black marriages specifically and Black love are seen in various gender and sexual orientations, various socioeconomic backgrounds, various household formations, and even different racial and ethnic groups. So I continue to question, when will our representation reflect our nuanced experiences, specifically related to Black love? Separate point that I'm going to make. So I study Black fatherhood. That's my research area. And last year, when Kobe Bryant, the tragic death of Kobe Bryant and Gianna Bryant occurred, what happened on Twitter and I believe also on Instagram was this widespread hashtag saying, I'm a girl dad and girl dad. And what we saw was so many Black fathers globally posted pictures of them with their daughters, with their children. And that started a conversation around, what does fatherhood look like? What does involvement look like? And that started to push back at the narrative of the Black father being invisible or uninvolved. And so I felt like at that moment in time, one, just a great remembrance of Kobe Bryant and all he stood for in his life, but then also this other piece of increasing the visibility of Black fatherhood, at least on the social media sphere. So just wanting to continue, I think we as a culture need to continue to question and ask, when will our representation reflect our nuanced experiences on media and in mass media?
Jocelyn, I really appreciate you highlighting, those multiple aspects around, Black love, as well as, fatherhood. And, as a girl dad as well, I can think of like how powerful that was, right? To just see those images and to see others, especially when we talk about some of the internalized patriarchy and sexism that we can struggle with, right? And to think about, like, to honor like the daughters that we have and that we care for and we love, and to be proud of that, especially as Black men and Black fathers. So I thought that was really powerful. And I think that when we think about representation, when I think of that, unfortunately, there have been things that we've been overly represented in that are not fully accurate, right? When you think about how we talk about prison, how we talk about crime, what happens in the news cycle, what we talk about injustice, when we talk about racism, murders, and so forth, right? All of that we've dealt with for a number of years, but that was even further highlighted last year with the different murders, including George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, which we just unfortunately celebrated the year anniversary of that, and Breonna Taylor and so forth. That all these things have been, I think, overly represented, and that I think your point, Jocelyn, and everyone else, that the nuance of who we are and how we feel and how we hurt and how we love and how we hope sometimes is not fully there. And representation really matters, right? It matters in so many ways, where we can say that, like, we can see people in the highest office, whether it be President Obama, or now being able to love and highlight Vice President Kamala Harris and where she is, to just see that. And I think on the other side of representation is that there has to be people, and has been people, who didn't have anyone that they could model after, and said that they're willing to blaze that trail. And like, I salute those people, the courage that they were willing to go through all the heartache, the pain, the put downs, the racism, the sexism, all of the injustices, to be able to model that for us, so that we can have people. And even just specifically, I remember graduating from my master's program and thinking about, I'm looking for Black male therapists, because there weren't that many of us. Still aren't that many of us. It's increased some, but I wanted to see other people that look like me. And so for me, that's a really big thing in my career, because I know that there's other people who might be saying, well, how did he get up there? Like, I didn't even know that he even existed, right? And so those things matter, because it shapes, as I had a conversation recently, it shapes to us and tells us that if I can see it, then I can do it, and I can be it, and I can be there, right? To see a Black king and queen, to see Black success, to see people overcome struggle, to see people be on a single income, but yet still have great hope and joy in their family, and to hear that story says, well, hey, I can do that too. And I think that that's one of my really big passions in my work as a therapist, is that I want to represent, right, as a therapist. I want to represent as a Black male, and so that people know, yeah, we can be in these careers, and we can impact people, and we can impact lives, and we can impact our community.
Yeah, wonderful. I love the advancement. Like, we have grown beyond representation being Black people on TV. We're wanting representation to actually represent us, represent our expansion, represent our diversity, represent our identity. It's not enough just for us to be in the room anymore, on the screen anymore. So I appreciate that. I thank you all for all of your thoughts. We do have a couple of questions from the group. So is there any distinct difference between American versus Canadian Black families? I'll address one piece. This was interesting so February is my favorite month of the year. I'll take the United States focus of 28 days of Black History Month, but I'm a 365er. So I appreciate the extra emphasis in February. I live in Oklahoma City, and so here for a job, and spent some time looking into what's the history of Black people here. And one of the things that I came across was this connection between Black people that had moved here, migrated to Tulsa from the South, and then at one point was run out of Tulsa, and there was this connection to a place in Canada. And I think about, even though we moved somewhere else and our location is different, our culture, the things that connect us are the same. So there may be some specific kinds of differences, but across the board, when we look at our history of where we came from and where we ended up, that connects us across the board. Any other thoughts?
I would like to share a thought, and it's not specifically to the Canadian culture, but I think that it could be used metaphorically to understand the difference for the American culture or an American Black culture versus other areas around the world. So, for example, in Latin countries, there were also Black slaves, but the way that they were liberated and the way that the the country and the nationalism was distributed across those individuals allowed for this idea of feeling prideful in that they might be um, Colombian, Panamanian, etc. That's not something that was afforded to Americans because this is something that we are still, as we can see just these past few years in the political climate, been fighting for. And so oftentimes I've even heard some of my clients that are from Caribbean descent say, I don't get it, right? I don't understand it. And looking back at the how of how we were liberated, and even if many even, might negate or argue that there was not really fully liberation, and even the idea of what it's like to be an American, right? It's very challenging sometimes for some African Americans in America to claim being American just because they've been shunned and oppressed and marginalized for so long. And so considering the origin of their country and how liberation was distributed might be helpful to better understand that demographic.
The next is, I work in prevention and early intervention, trying to provide those supports that are offered long before abuse and neglect happens. Are there specific support or acknowledgements that people in prevention programs need to bring to the table when working with Black families?
If I understand that, I'm going to highlight from this aspect. My wife is in public health, and I've learned a great deal from her. And in when we think about prevention, often we use statistics, zip codes, information, and unfortunately, sometimes what we'll see is there's a higher grouping or intersection of race and class, and in particular, sometimes a higher number of Black, maybe low-income individuals who might be struggling with a list of different things. But what happens is that then that just gets highlighted over and over, and then we start to like label people and then put people in these categories. And I think that sometimes what people think are well-intentioned good ways to try to help people be better or healthier or more successful, it starts off with putting people down or labeling or marginalizing people even further. So I think that prevention is important and necessary, but I think that as being a part of another group that I was able to be affiliated with, being able to think about asset framing, being able to think about what are people's aspirations, what are the things that people are trying to hope for or get to, and that we don't just put people in that, oh, this is a high concentration of folks with HIV or folks with whatever it might be. So just to really be mindful of how we approach it and how we go about it, because we could further be continuing this negative narrative that we're all really trying to fight against.
One of the things that stood out when George was talking about the prevention piece. I was talking to someone about this the other day in terms of in Atlanta, they have what APS schools. That's the Atlanta public school system, and they've seen just this tremendous amount of kids that basically get lost in the system, and they find themselves out of school and in prison, and these very young offenders and so forth. And so they were talking about, what can we do to prevent this from happening? And so the thing that struck me about that was the ideal of prevention. The question becomes prevention from what and to what end? What is the goal? Is the goal to prevent so that that this person or this family can be the ideal family? Or is it prevention that this family might find a way forward for itself? Because when I think about prevention programs, I often think that there is a vision of what this person who has got the support would ultimately be if they could get this prevention. But ultimately, I think part of the challenge is is that often leads to putting people in categories of what they ought to be and not simply allowing people to sort of develop into what they might be.
Okay. Having worked in the prison system with a majority of Black individuals, how should we go about having hope instead of feeling like victims? Any thoughts?
I think, you know, some of what we've been sharing today, right, is that like there's just like I'm energized, I'm excited, I'm hype, right? Like in terms of like our conversation and what we've said. And I think that it's holding on to that, right? That it I personally believe it doesn't matter where people are. It doesn't matter if if they're incarcerated. It doesn't matter if they've had some negative, unfortunate challenges in their life, or maybe even some mistakes. What I hope to bring is the hope, is that joy, is the connection that we've all been talking about, and it is knowing that that person or group of individuals has potential to do lots of great things in their life. And great doesn't mean like they need to go off and like own a business. It could be just they reconnect with their family. And so I think being able to bring that, and I think as clinicians, sometimes we struggle with that, right? Because either we've seen certain situations over and over, or we've even been personally disappointed, or we're carrying some negative bias about people and where they might come from or what they might have done. And so I think a lot of it sometimes is continuing to check ourselves. And for me, it's continuing to check myself, right? About like, all right, let me be aware of that, because that's kind of getting in the way of me being at the core, someone who can provide hope and belief that something better can happen.
I appreciate that piece about continued self-work. One of the things I tell my students is we start self-work, self with a therapist work in the program, but this is lifelong. It doesn't end when you graduate. It continues across the board. And I do think we have to do that work, because often as the therapist, we need to bring the hope to the clients that can't see that piece. And if we don't have that and we can't see that, how are we presenting that for the clients that are needing that piece?
You know, no, please, Jocelyn.
I was going to just say really quickly, I think also having a systemic focus could be helpful in working with, I believe the question was working with incarcerated, perhaps,
Yes.
Or those that are incarcerated. I think also bringing in that systemic focus of systemically, they have probably encountered a lot of institutional barriers and, dare I say, racism at that point, in many different systems, whether that be housing, education, once again, the criminal justice system. And so I think highlighting that and normalizing some of those pieces, but then also validating and supporting them as a clinician, I think could be really helpful to say that it's not necessarily so much an individual focus, but that systemically there are things that are just structurally incomplete, that has perhaps led this person to that situation. And I think that can help in offering hope to them as well.
And just to piggyback on that just a little bit in terms of the systemic focus, the one thing that I think about when, even with the question about the person being incarcerated, the reality of it is that we have to find some way to instill hope in the whole system of the family, because this person is generally connected to an awful lot of people, mothers, fathers, children that they've not seen, just a whole host of people, you know, folks back on the block, cousins. I mean, and if there's some level of, if you can instill some hope in the incarcerated, that's in some ways could, you know, potentially instill hope in the family system, or even vice versa. If you're actually sitting with the family who's got an incarcerated member, and if you see enough folks, it's likely that if you do good genograms, you're going to find that someone's incarcerated in almost every family. If they haven't been incarcerated in this generation, if you look back far enough, somebody's been caught, you know, moonshining or some other kind of, you know, thing. But the reality of it is that it's the family that's also incarcerated. And if we can do something in order to instill hope in the family, that may very well give the incarcerated an opportunity to do something different.
Can a non-Black therapist instill or bring hope to therapy for Black clients?
May I? I just want to speak on this one. This is one of my areas. Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that just as Jocelyn shared, the systemic view is going to be the most helpful one I have found. Looking through that lens, things become very clear, and they also will help externalize a lot for that individual who is a non-Black, white, Caucasian, European, white passing, however they identify. It's crucial, really. It really is crucial that you can, and I'm speaking to you directly, that you see that there is hope there. When you receive resistance, and I use that R word with parentheses, when you receive resistance or maybe it doesn't land the way that you want, really pull back to that systemic lens and understand that there's something so much bigger here that you're trying to instill hope in. And that hope is really just going back, another investment, right, to that. And so understanding that as you're doing your work as a clinician that is not a Black clinician or a clinician of color, that work goes a long way. And when you have those conversations throughout, right, that authenticity, when you're saying it in your homes, in your personal life, with your clients, when you can self-identify, self-locate, etc., it allows you to be in a position to validate, even though you may not be able to relate. And so just to encourage you, absolutely, your voice is needed, especially in our community, and support and in a validating way and with a systemic lens.
Michael, were you going to chime in?
Yeah, one of the things I was going to say is that it's absolutely you can instill hope and you can be very, very useful, because underneath all of this, right, the Black family, white families, whatever the case may be, there are some universal things that are at play here. I mean, if you can, when you sit with someone and you know that they're sincerely interested in you, you can feel that something happens in that moment. I mean, you feel less relaxed, you feel less anxious, you give yourself an opportunity to be more vulnerable and so forth. So if in fact, if there is, as Portia said, if there's this sense of authenticity, and you have to, and we as therapists obviously have to do a lot of work to be authentic with ourselves, because oftentimes we can trick ourselves into believing that we're more authentic than we actually are. So we have to really get down to the nitty gritty and figure out, hey, look, am I really showing up as, the real me, or am I trying to put on a front of some sort? So if I don't do that work, it's going to be hard for the client to put on that work. So there's this old therapist, Harry Stack Sullivan. Harry Stack Sullivan was in the psychoanalytic realm, and he really thought systemically, but it didn't come out that way. But one of the things that I always remember about what he read, he said the one thing that a therapist must remember is that in a counseling room, there are two people trying to be impressive, the counselor and the client. And when two people are in the room trying to be impressive, not much happens. So the hope is that we can somehow really be authentic. And if you show that authenticity, much can happen.
Good. So last question, we'll probably have to answer kind of quickly, but it's a good question. How would you approach working with children or young adults who are, well, they say mixed, Black, and something else, feel that they belong to this community?
I don't know if anyone else wants to speak, but that's the niche of my practice. So I'm just going to say something really, really quickly. I think the both and perspective can be most helpful. And I think when I have a few adolescents who come to me for that specifically, from a variety of demographics and social economic status. And what I'm realizing is that it's a both and validating and allowing them to be more than one thing in a society that requires them to be simply one point. And they're not. And as human beings, we're not. We're very complex. And that goes beyond our race or the color of our skin. And so really accentuating the complexity as a value and as an entity of diversity and that their experience is relevant, right? And it is the future as we know it currently, as the census is trying to tell us. Those are the areas that I have found to be most helpful. Also, lastly, identifying their core values at that age helps them assign and see the comparisons, right? That even though I might be Black and white or Hispanic and Black, I still have the same values, and I can see those values in each of those cultures. And that creates that both and perspective. And from there, that's how I build.
I'll just quickly add that I think a lot of it also includes, just identity formation as well as the racial identity. And, there's lots of work that's been done not only on racial identity, not only on Black identity, multi-ethnic identity formation, as well as white identity formation. So I think sometimes it's just understanding that, as well as just, as Portia shared, like being able to help those individuals figure out what that means for them in this moment, and knowing that some of that might shift or adjust. And then going back to our representation, I think having more and more people of mixed, multiple identities, multiple ethnicities, that we see that more and more. And it's to say that, okay, here are some examples that you can connect with.
Very good. We have a couple of minutes, so any parting words that you all would like to share?
I saw something in the chat that I'll just highlight. So I think someone asked, like, do we work with many white families? And I have, like, I have a good amount of white clients, and I assume that, many of you all do. And I still try to bring myself authentically with my clients. And it provides a really interesting conversation about what that means for us in that space. And so I really appreciate this time, this opportunity. I've enjoyed this conversation. I'm going to be thinking about some stuff. Portia, you dropped that investment on me. I'm really thinking about that. Jocelyn, I love everything you shared around, love and Black love. And, Michael, I appreciate, everything that you talked about regarding the family. And Camille, thanks for just bringing us all together. So thank you, everybody, for this time and opportunity.
I would say too, my last thought would be that one of the things that we can rest assured of is that we don't have to figure all this out in one day. All we have to do is continue to get curious, because the reality of it is that at every stage of our lives, throughout the life cycle, there are going to be different questions all along the way. If you're raising a child that's interracial, and the child has never gone to school, different questions will happen when the child goes to school. So all along the way, we have to continue to sort of remain curious about how this is unfolded. If you're married, the first year of marriage is going to be different than the fifth year of marriage. So you got to kind of keep your eye open, right? So it's not a once in a lifetime, let's get it done and solve today. It's this kind of ongoing curiosity. And I think the more we're able to take a deep dive in our own lives and get curious, the more we're able to take a deep dive in our clients' lives and stay curious.
Portia?
Yes. I would just part by saying, just emphasizing a little bit of what we just touched on is just the complexity, right? Even when we very first started out, we talked about what is Black, right? And this is with a panel full of Black individuals identifying as Black and et cetera. And so if we even think about that and the complexity behind it, I think that trying to reduce or deduct it down to something that we feel most comfortable understanding might not be the most helpful thing to do. I think maybe staying open, like Michael's saying, putting on that hat of curiosity, like Jocelyn has eloquently intertwined into all of this, making sure that we're staying systemic, right? And really making sure that if we come from that lens or that platform, then the personal offense should be minimal, because it really is outside of us as the Black community already understands. George gave brilliant examples, even how he's pulling from his wife, right? His experience from his fatherhood, the stories that we tell, the music that we have. We're a very complex culture. And I don't really want to be oversimplified. When I do, so much of me is lost, right? So if you want to see me, open your eyes to see me, is where I would leave it with. And it's okay that I'm complicated. And I hope to get a little more complex as the years go on and the generations proceed.
Yeah.
I just want to say, you know, I'm just so thankful to be a part of this discussion. You know, there's just something about when Black folks get together, you know, I just feel so poured into and so uplifted, and I'm so thankful to be a part of this experience. All of the panelists have just really given great nuggets that I will continue to chew on for the rest of the day. I also want to highlight how valuable these discussions are. I'm also appreciative that AMFT has taken the time, although it's Black History Month, to center these conversations. And I'm hopeful that as our representation within the AMFT field continues to increase, that we'll have more opportunities and more spaces to continue to center in our experiences within as Black therapists and Black people. So I'm really appreciative of the space and the time that we've had today.
Well, I would like to thank all of you, our panelists, for your time, and AMFT also for the opportunity. I invite you all to join Margins to Center on March 19th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Our first webinar of the year will be hosted by Dr. Sandra Espinoza and Dr. Iman Dadras. They will address the relationship between self of the therapist and political orientation. Registration is open, so we invite you to register for that training. And then on June 4th, we have Dr. Leslie Anderson, who will address exploring the dimensions of race and resilience with Black families in therapy, which we're excited and look forward to both of those trainings and hope you can join us as well. So we thank you for joining us today. We wish you peace, be well, and stay safe.